The plains were still, the kind of silence that pressed heavy on a man's chest. Jonah McGraw rode with the sun just climbing, his coat stained in dust, his face carved deeper by years of work and solitude. The road bent near a dry creek bed, and it was there he saw it, an odd burlap sack slumped against a stone, faintly shifting like something alive. His horse stopped on its own, ears twitching at the sound. From inside came a muffled cry, sharp and desperate, cutting the morning. "Air, please, open it, I can't breathe." Jonah swung down from the saddle, his boots crunching on brittle earth. His fingers, stiff with calluses, fumbled at the knot. The rope was cruelly tight. When at last the sack opened, a face spilled out into the light pail, streaked with dust and tears. A young woman gasped at the sky as if she had been drowning. For a moment Jonah did not move. His breath caught, not from fear but from recognition. Something in her hollow eyes mirrored the silence that had lived in him for years. He stared as though he were seeing a ghost, though he did not know her name. She crumpled into the dirt, clutching at air, her wrists raw from rope burns. Jonah felt shame creep up his throat. He had once turned away from others' pain, told himself it wasn't his burden. But here it was in his hands, in the dust before him. He lifted her gently, her body feather-light against his chest, and set her on his horse. The ride into town was slow. Neither spoke. Dust rose behind them, and silence rode beside them like a third shadow. When he reached the main street, eyes turned. Silas Boone, the storekeeper, squinted from his porch. He muttered loud enough for others to hear. "What's McGraw dragging in now?" "A sack woman. Mercy, what shame." Children pointed. Women pulled their skirts aside as though Clara Belle Whitmore carried disease. Jonah did not answer. His jaw hardened, his eyes fixed straight ahead. Clara bowed her head, her hair falling like a curtain, trying to hide her tears. "The towns?" Whispers cut deeper than the ropes ever had. Jonah did not leave her in that storm of eyes. He took her past them all, back to his ranch where loneliness stretched wider than the prairie. He said nothing, offered no comfort in words, but in the kitchen he placed bread and water before her. He draped a quilt across her shoulders, mended a broken chair so she might sit without wobble. Clara noticed his hands. They were rough, sun-cracked, scarred from years of labor. Yet when they set the quilt on her shoulders, they carried a gentleness that startled her. She had been touched before only with force, with cruelty. His silence was different. It was not empty. It held something she could not name. Later, as wind whispered at the windows, she shared fragments of herself. She had been taken, punished for debts that weren't hers, abandoned by kin who had vanished into dust. Her voice faltered, her gaze fixed on the floorboards. Jonah did not press for more. He only listened, the weight of her words settling into the cracks of his own grief. In return, his eyes gave small truths. A wife buried young. A house too large for one soul. Nights spent listening to coyotes because no human breath filled the dark. Their sorrows did not compete. They recognized each other in the stillness, like two mirrors leaning against one another, both cracked, both reflecting back what the other feared to see. Night fell. Clara slept beneath the quilt, her breathing soft, fragile. Jonah sat outside, on the porch, watching stars scatter cold light over the plain. He rubbed the dust from his palms, the weight of the day pressing in. He did not know if she would stay, nor what storms the town might bring. Yet for the first time in years, the silence of his ranch felt less like exile and more like waiting for something not yet spoken. The days that followed did not belong to them alone. In town, the whispers grew sharper, like knives turned in the dark. Silas Boone leaned across his store counter and spat out his poison to anyone who'd listen. "She's no better than a stray. McGraw's a fool, talking her in." His words spread quicker than prairie fire. Clara heard them. At the well, women drew back their buckets, their voices soft but not soft enough. "That's the sack girl. Poor thing's ruined." Their stares cut deeper than their words, leaving her cheeks burning as if branded. Jonah stood nearby, quiet as stone, yet his eyes held steady against theirs. Without saying it, he told her, "You are not alone on the ranch." Their silence became something else. It was not the hush of exile, but the slow growth of trust. Jonah saddled his old mare and placed the reins in Clara's trembling hands. She feared falling, but when the horse shifted beneath her and Jonah's steady voice said, "Lean with her, not against," she laughed short, startled, like a sound she hadn't remembered her throat could make. Jonah almost smiled. Clara in turn mended what was broken. She patched curtains frayed by years of neglect, tucked wildflowers into a chip jar, and swept the dust from corners Jonah had long forgotten. The house shifted under her care, no longer hollow but breathing again. In these small acts they stitched something fragile but real, each gesture a thread binding two broken lives. The town would not let them rest. Sheriff Eldon Price rode out one evening, his horse slow, his hat low. He dismounted with the weariness of a man tired of the same fights. "Jonah," he said, voice heavy, "folks are uneasy. They say her past ain't clean. They want her gone." Jonah looked at the sheriff, then at Clara standing in the doorway, her hands tight around her skirt. He said simply, "Then let him talk." The sheriff studied him a long while before tipping his hat and riding off. Clara's breath shook. Never before had anyone stood against the tide for her. The words were few, but they struck like lightning, yet shame is stubborn. One night, Clara packed what little she had, a torn shawl, a bit of bread, and crept to the gate. Lantern light trembled in her hands. She thought of freeing Jonah from the weight of her scandal, thought of sparing him the town scorn. Her tears blurred the stars above. Jonah found her there, caught in the dim glow. He did not grab her arm, did not raise his voice. He only said soft and steady, "You deserve more than running." The words stopped her. She had never believed such a thing could be true. Her knees weakened and she let the sack fall. Jonah lifted the lantern, and in its circle of light, she saw not pity in his eyes but quiet knowing, the kind of knowing that comes from a man who has run too, and found nothing waiting at the end of the trail. She stayed when the first great storm of the season rolled across the plains. Jonah and Clara faced it together. Wind tore at the shingles, rain lashed their faces, the barn doors buckled like thin ribs. They fought side by side, tying ropes against the wind's fury, their hands slipping, their bodies battered. Inside the thunder, something shifted. Words were spoken, but the storm heard their vow. Neither would face the next tempest alone. By morning, the ranch was soaked, their clothes heavy with mud, but the house still stood. Exhausted, they sat at the table, steam rising from their bread. Clara's hair clung to her cheeks, Jonah's shoulders slumped, yet in the silence between them, the air felt alive, reborn, as though the storm had swept the old lives clean. Months passed, and the whispers of the town began to dull. Clara rode beside Jonah into town, her head lifted higher now. Children waved. Some women, softer in their hearts than their tongues, nodded at her. Even Silas Boone, sharp as he was, found no words when he saw her strength. The ranch was no longer an empty stretch of land. It pulsed with life, with two souls who had chosen dignity over judgment, and perhaps that is the truest ending, that no grand declaration was ever made. No promises carved in stone, no wedding bells demanded. Only two broken hearts that piece by piece chose to stay, chose to mend, chose to breathe again in the presence of the other. So, dear listener, if the world ever binds you tight, if whispers turn into chains, remember Clara's plea in the sack and the calloused hands that set her free. Sometimes salvation does not arrive in thunder or glory, but in the quiet acts a place to rest, a silence shared, a soul who will not let you face the storm alone.